Hey guys, tonight we begin with the surprisingly complex and unexpectedly profound world of giraffes. Those towering creatures who navigate life 18 feet above the ground, turning simple tasks like drinking water into daily engineering projects. While nature documentaries make them look graceful, the truth is, being the world's tallest animal comes with challenges you've never considered. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Standing up is less of an achievement and more of an ongoing negotiation with gravity. You've got the height of a basketball hoop and the coordination of someone trying to thread a needle while riding a unicycle. In the dark, during an earthquake, the world spreads out beneath you in all directions, a carpet of golden grass punctuated by umbrella-shaped trees that look like they were designed by someone who'd only heard trees described second-hand. The morning air carries the smell of dust and possibility, though mostly dust. Your mother stands nearby, methodically working through her breakfast with the focused determination of someone who knows that parenting requires proper nutrition and infinite patience. Your first meal involves a 15-minute internal debate about whether that leaf is worth the effort of bending down. The leaf in question dangles approximately 3 feet below your mouth, which might as well be 3 miles given your current relationship with your own limbs. Your legs have apparently entered into a complex diplomatic negotiation about which one gets to bend first, and the talks are not going well. Spoiler alert, the leaf is not worth it, but you'll eat it anyway, because your mother is watching with the patience of someone who's been through this exact routine before. She has that particular expression that mothers develop when they realize their offspring's learning curve resembles less of a curve and more of a very gentle, very prolonged decline. The leaf tastes like disappointment, seasoned with morning dew. You chew it thoughtfully, trying to project an air of sophisticated appreciation while internally questioning every life choice that led to this moment. Your mother continues her own breakfast, occasionally glancing in your direction with the kind of casual vigilance that suggests she's calculating the probability of you falling over in the next 5 minutes. A zebra family passes by, their stripes creating optical illusions in the shifting light. They move with the confident efficiency of creatures who figured out their coordination issues sometime during the Pleistocene. You try to look casual, which involves accidentally stepping on your own foot and pretending it was intentional. The zebras are politely unimpressed, continuing their morning patrol with the kind of diplomatic blindness that prevents savannah incidents. The youngest zebra foal pauses to stare at you with the frank curiosity of youth. You attempt a dignified nod, which requires careful coordination between your neck and your sense of balance. The result is less dignified nod and more full-body wobble that ends with you taking 3 quick steps to avoid toppling sideways into a termite mound. The zebra foal's mother calls softly, and they trot away, leaving you with the distinct impression that you've just failed some sort of basic competency test that you didn't know you were taking. You discover that your tongue is approximately the length of your mother's disappointment in your coordination skills. It unfurls from your mouth like a party streamer at a celebration nobody wanted to attend, purple, black, and prehensile, and entirely too enthusiastic about its job. The tongue has opinions about which leaves are acceptable, and it expresses these opinions by wrapping around everything within reach with the indiscriminate enthusiasm of a toddler at a petting zoo. Your first successful leaf retrieval happens entirely by accident. You're attempting to scratch an itch behind your ear when your tongue, operating on its own mysterious agenda, snags a cluster of acacia leaves and delivers them directly to your mouth. The leaves are actually quite good, tender, with just the right balance of nutrients and morning moisture. You spend the next 20 minutes trying to replicate this accidental success, with results that range from mediocre to embarrassing. Days blur into a series of small victories and smaller defeats. You learn that walking involves lifting all 4 legs in some sort of sequence that nobody bothers to explain. The instruction manual for giraffe locomotion appears to have been written by someone who assumed everyone would figure it out intuitively, like breathing or being shorter. Your legs have developed distinct personalities. The front left is cautious, always checking for stable ground before committing to a step. The front right is optimistic to the point of recklessness, willing to trust that solid ground will appear beneath it through sheer positive thinking. The back legs operate as a committee, deliberating each decision with the thoroughness of a small-town zoning board. The morning routine begins before dawn, when the world is painted in shades of grey and possibility. Your mother moves through her feeding pattern with the methodical precision of someone following a mental map marked with decades of experience. She knows which trees leaf out first, which patches of grass hold the most dew, which roots offer the best combination of nutrition and safety. You follow behind her, trying to memorize not just where she goes, but why she chooses each particular path. The savannah reveals itself to be less of a uniform grassland and more of a complex neighborhood, with preferred routes and established territories and social dynamics that extend far beyond the obvious. The acacia trees stand scattered across the landscape like thoughtful punctuation marks in a very long, very slow sentence. Each tree has its own character, some young and eager, their leaves tender and easily reached, others ancient and gnarled, their best broughs reserved for those tall enough and patient enough to negotiate with their thorny defenses. Your neck is less of a body part and more of a separate entity with its own weather system. It operates according to principles of physics that seem to apply only to necks of unusual length, swaying and compensating for wind patterns you can't feel and balance considerations you don't understand. Sometimes it feels like you're carrying around a very tall, very opinionated passenger who occasionally remembers to coordinate with the rest of you. Learning to drink water becomes a daily exercise in applied engineering and personal humility. The watering hole appears deceptively simple from your normal height. Just a muddy depression filled with water that reflects the sky and occasionally ripples with the movement of fish or the landing of water birds. Your first drink of water requires you to assume a position that would make a yoga instructor weep. Your legs spread wider than your sense of dignity, each one searching for purchase on ground that becomes increasingly unreliable the further you stretch. Your neck telescopes down like a construction crane having an existential crisis. And somewhere above you, your mother sighs, the sigh of mothers everywhere, who are wondering where they went wrong. The physics of drinking while extremely tall turn out to involve considerations that shorter animals never face. Your center of gravity shifts with each movement, requiring constant micro-adjustments to prevent the kind of spectacular fall that would provide entertainment for every creature within a half-mile radius. The water, when you finally reach it, tastes like triumph mixed with mud and the faint mineral tang of geological processes you don't have names for. The watering hole reflects a wobbly, upside-down world where everything makes slightly more sense. Fish swim through clouds, and you briefly consider joining them. The reflected sky looks more peaceful than the actual sky, less complicated by the immediate concerns of being a very tall animal in a world full of shorter, more confident creatures. A family of warthogs waddles past, their practical ugliness somehow more honest than your own awkward elegance. They approach the water with the straightforward efficiency of creatures who solved the drinking problem millennia ago and haven't wasted time reconsidering their techniques since. They drink, they socialize briefly, they move on to whatever urgent warthog business requires their attention. You feel a kinship with their general air of making it up as they go. One of them nods at you with the universal acknowledgement of creatures who peaked evolutionarily and decided that was probably fine. It's a moment of interspecies understanding that transcends the obvious differences in height, diet, and grooming habits. Your attempt at running resembles someone operating a very tall, very unstable puppet. The gazelles nearby pause their morning routine to stare, not in wonder, but in the way you'd watch someone trying to parallel park a school bus. Your legs move in a sequence that is technically locomotion, but bears only a passing resemblance to the efficient grace you observe in other animals. The gazelles resume their activities with the polite indifference of creatures who have learned not to comment on the personal struggles of their neighbors. They bound away across the grassland with an effortless coordination that makes your own movement look like a very slow-motion disaster perpetually on the verge of happening. Your first real danger comes not with dramatic music or slow-motion sequences, but with the quiet realization that those golden shapes in the tall grass are probably not, in fact, oddly shaped rocks. The morning light plays tricks with shadows and distance, turning the familiar landscape into something that requires more careful interpretation. The shapes move with the kind of purposeful casualness that suggests they're trying very hard to look like they're not doing anything in particular. This is the sort of behavior that sets off alarm bells in the part of your brain that handles survival. Though it takes a moment for the message to travel from your brain to your legs via your neck, which is still focused on the important business of leaf selection. Lions, it turns out, have been having philosophical discussions about the logistics of giraffe hunting for generations. The conclusion they've reached is roughly, it's complicated, but we're bored, so why not? They approach the problem with the kind of academic interest that suggests they're more curious about the theoretical possibility than committed to the practical application. The lead female moves with the fluid confidence of a creature who has never doubted her ability to catch anything she sets her mind to. Her companions spread out in what might be a hunting formation, or might just be a casual social arrangement. With lions, it's often difficult to tell the difference until it's too late to matter. The chase that follows is less of a chase and more of a very slow-motion dance where everyone involved is secretly hoping someone else will take the lead. You discover that your top speed is concerned amble, a gait that communicates urgency while acknowledging the fundamental limitations of your design. Your legs, which have barely mastered walking, approach the concept of running with the enthusiasm of committee members asked to volunteer for overtime. The lions, meanwhile, discover that catching something this tall requires a stepladder they don't have. Their usual hunting strategies, refined through generations of pursuing reasonably sized prey, prove inadequate when applied to a target that towers above the grass line like a mobile watchtower with legs. The savannah watches this unfold with the detached interest of someone channel surfing. A secretary bird pauses its morning hunt to observe, head tilted in the universal expression of, well, this is new. Somewhere in the distance, a family of meerkats emerges from their burrow to get a better view of the proceedings, chattering among themselves with the animated commentary of sports fans watching an unexpectedly interesting play. Your mother, meanwhile, has perfected the art of looking simultaneously concerned and utterly unsurprised. She positions herself between you and danger with the casual competence of someone who's been doing this longer than you've been tall. Her presence shifts the dynamic from potential predation to something more like a very tense negotiation between parties who all understand the rules but aren't entirely sure they want to follow them. The other adult giraffes in the area begin to materialize from the acacia groves like very tall, very unimpressed backup singers. They don't hurry. Giraffes rarely hurry. But they arrive with the kind of purposeful convergence that suggests this sort of thing has happened before and will happen again, and everyone involved knows their role in the proceedings. The lions find themselves outnumbered by creatures whose primary defensive strategy appears to be looking down at them with the kind of mild disappointment usually reserved for teenagers who've missed curfew. It's not aggressive, exactly, but it's the sort of collective disapproval that makes even apex predators reconsider their life choices. The standoff ends when the lions realize they've wandered into what amounts to a giraffe neighborhood watch program. They retreat with the dignity of cats who meant to knock that thing off the table anyway, their departure marked by the kind of casual nonchalance that suggests this was all just a misunderstanding that could happen to anyone. You realize that being tall isn't just about reaching high leaves, it's about being part of a community of creatures who've collectively decided that dignity is overrated, but family is not. The other giraffes gradually disperse back to their individual morning routines, but the message is clear. You're not just a very tall animal trying to figure out how to operate your own legs. You're part of something larger, something that has been working out the details of survival for far longer than you've been alive. The morning settles back into its normal rhythm, though you notice that your mother positions herself a little closer as you resume your halting progress through breakfast. The lesson wasn't about lions. Exactly. It was about the difference between being alone and being part of a community that happens to be scattered across several acres of savanna, but remains connected by invisible threads of mutual responsibility. Your tongue finds another cluster of leaves, and this time you manage to retrieve them without falling over. Small victories, you're learning, are still victories. Adolescence hits you like a growth spurt having a growth spurt. Your legs develop opinions of their own. Your neck enters a rebellious phase where it refuses to coordinate with your head, and your spots rearrange themselves with the randomness of a teenager's sleep schedule. What was once merely awkward coordination becomes something approaching interpretive dance performed by someone who's never heard music. The morning sun finds you attempting what should be a simple task, reaching for leaves that are practically at eye level, but your body has apparently overnight forgotten every lesson it learned about basic mechanics. Your neck swings left while your head aims right, creating a brief moment of existential confusion about which part of you is actually in charge of this operation. You've reached the height where you can see into tomorrow's weather, literally watching storm systems form and dissipate on the horizon like slow-motion theatre, but you still can't figure out how to drink water without looking like you're auditioning for a very specific type of performance art. The physics of being this tall have become more complex, not less, as if someone keeps adding new variables to an equation you thought you'd finally understood. Your reflection in the watering hole shows a creature that seems to have been assembled from spare parts ordered from different catalogues. Your legs belong to someone approximately your height, your torso suggests someone slightly shorter, and your neck appears to have been borrowed from someone who ordered the deluxe model. The spots that once seemed randomly charming now look like they're migrating across your hide according to some mysterious seasonal pattern. The giraffe equivalent of high school involves a lot of standing around looking casually tall while internally panicking about whether you're standing correctly. Other young giraffes practice their "I'm not trying to be the tallest" posture, which involves a subtle slouch that fools absolutely no one but provides the comforting illusion of voluntary height reduction. The social dynamics of adolescent giraffes operate according to rules that seem to have been written by someone who found regular social interaction insufficiently complicated. There's the careful negotiation of personal space when everyone involved takes up significantly more space than they did last season. There's the delicate balance between appearing confident and avoiding the kind of overconfidence that leads to embarrassing displays of incompetence. Your first attempt at impressing a potential friend involves showing off your leaf-reaching abilities. You select a particularly choice cluster of acacia leaves, positioned at what should be an easy height for someone of your impressive stature. The demonstration begins well, with what you consider to be an elegant extension of your neck and a casual deployment of your tongue that suggests years of experience. This goes about as well as expected, which is to say you manage to get your head stuck in a tree and require assistance from your mother, who arrives with the expression of someone who saw this coming from several miles away. She approaches with the weary patience of a creature who has spent years preparing for exactly this sort of emergency, carrying herself with the resignation of someone who knows that adolescence is a phase that must be endured rather than enjoyed. The extraction process involves a careful choreography of neck positioning and branch negotiation that highlights the difference between your ambitions and your current skill level. Your mother performs the rescue with the efficient competence of someone who has clearly practiced this maneuver, while you hang there like a very tall, very embarrassed ornament that someone hung too high on the tree. The potential friend watches this entire proceedings with the diplomatic neutrality of someone who's learning important lessons about the gap between confidence and ability. The friendship that eventually develops is built on a foundation of mutual acknowledgement that everyone is basically making this up as they go along, and that's probably okay. You discover that being tall means seeing the world in layers that shorter creatures never experience. There's the ground-level drama of the smaller animals, all urgent, scurrying, and immediate concerns that seem both vitally important and completely incomprehensible from your elevated perspective. Mice dart between grass stems on missions that appear to involve life or death decisions made every few seconds. There's the mid-level politics of the bushes and smaller trees, where the real negotiations happen. This is the realm of the medium-sized creatures, the antelopes and warthogs and wild dogs, who conduct their social business at heights that require you to crane your neck downward to observe. Their world operates according to social rules that seem more complex than your own, involving territorial disputes and alliance formations that play out in the spaces between the grass and your normal field of vision. And then there's your level, where the conversation is mostly about weather and the philosophical implications of acacia leaves. Up here, the concerns are longer term and more contemplative. The quality of browse in different seasonal conditions, the comparative merits of various scratching posts. The subtle art of reading atmospheric pressure changes through the behavior of high-flying birds. A family of meerkats has taken up residence near your favorite drinking spot, and they've apparently decided that you represent a significant improvement to the local infrastructure. They treat you like a very tall, very mobile watchtower, posting lookouts on your legs while you're trying to have a drink. You've become less of an animal and more of a public utility. The meerkats conduct their sentry duties with the professional efficiency of creatures who take security very seriously. They climb your legs with the casual familiarity of regular commuters boarding a familiar bus, positioning themselves at optimal viewing angles and maintaining a constant chatter of status updates and threat assessments. You find their presence oddly comforting, even when their tiny claws create small punctures in your hide that itch for days afterward. There's something reassuring about being useful, about providing a service that makes the difference between safety and danger for creatures who have invested their trust in your stability and height. Leaving home happens gradually, like a very tall tide going out. One day you're following your mother to the good leaf spots, learning the established routes and traditional stopping points that have been refined through generations of giraffes who faced the same basic challenges of finding food and avoiding danger. The next day, you're making your own questionable decisions about which trees are worth the walk, based on criteria that seem reasonable at the time but prove to have overlooked important considerations like distance, leaf quality, and the presence of territorial neighbors who don't appreciate casual browsing. The transition from dependence to independence operates according to no schedule that anyone bothers to explain. Your mother begins to express subtle suggestions that you might enjoy exploring some of the farther territories, perhaps expanding your knowledge of the area's resources, maybe considering the benefits of developing your own personal relationship with various water sources. These suggestions arrive with the diplomatic gentleness of someone who's trying to encourage independence without hurting feelings or precipitating premature departure. She continues to provide guidance and support, but with the gradually diminishing frequency of someone who's preparing you for a world where she won't always be available to solve problems or provide directions to the best feeding areas. Your first territory is less of a territory and more of a hopeful suggestion. It consists of 3 decent acacia trees that provide adequate nutrition and reasonable shelter, a rock that provides excellent scratching opportunities and doubles as a convenient observation post, and a view of the river that you tell yourself is panoramic rather than distant. The trees are younger than the ancient giants that anchor the established territories, but they're enthusiastic in their leaf production and relatively free of the thorny complications that make some browsing feel like a negotiation with armed guards. The scratching rock is positioned at the perfect height for addressing those hard-to-reach itches that seem to develop specifically in places where your neck can't quite bend to reach. The river view provides entertainment in the form of ongoing wildlife drama and serves as an early warning system for weather changes, though it also serves as a constant reminder that water access requires a significant hike that cuts into valuable browsing time. Your first territorial dispute is with a weaver bird who's built her nest in what you consider to be your breakfast tree. She's constructed an elaborate hanging basket that represents months of careful architectural planning and demonstrates a level of engineering sophistication that puts your own shelter arrangements to shame. The negotiation is brief and civilized, conducted through a series of meaningful glances and strategic positioning that communicates mutual respect for each other's investment in the location. She gets the tree in the mornings, when her domestic arrangements require privacy and immediate access to prime nesting materials. You get it in the afternoons, when the leaves have absorbed optimal amounts of sunlight and the bird's activities have moved to other areas. You both pretend this was the plan all along, maintaining the diplomatic fiction that the conflict never existed and that the current arrangement represents a long-standing agreement between reasonable neighbors who've always understood the benefits of cooperation. A young male giraffe wanders into your space with the casual confidence of someone who hasn't yet learned that confidence and competence are different things. He surveys your territory with the appraising eye of someone who's considering whether your resources might suit his needs better than his current arrangements, which apparently involves significantly more walking and considerably less reliable water access. The resulting standoff involves a lot of parallel standing, both of you pretending to browse while actually conducting a careful assessment of the other's size, commitment level, and willingness to escalate the situation beyond polite territorial suggestion. There's some half-hearted neck wrestling that serves more as a mutual fitness assessment than a serious attempt at physical dominance. The confrontation resolves when you both realize that you're more interested in the good leaves than in proving a point about territorial boundaries that were never clearly established in the first place. The young male continues his explorations in a different direction, and you return to the business of figuring out how to make your hopeful suggestion of a territory into something that actually provides reliable resources. You discover that being independent mostly means making the same mistakes your mother warned you about, but at least now they're your mistakes. There's something oddly satisfying about choosing the wrong tree to shelter under during a rainstorm, even when you end up wetter than the fish, and considerably less comfortable than you would have been if you'd listened to her advice about reading weather patterns and selecting shelter based on canopy density rather than convenience. Your first independent weather prediction success happens during a season when the atmospheric conditions seem particularly readable. You observe the cloud formations developing on the horizon, note the changes in wind patterns and the behavior of the smaller animals, and make the strategic decision to move to higher ground before the afternoon storms arrive. The first time you successfully predict weather by reading cloud patterns, you spend the afternoon feeling smugly competent. You watch the rain fall on the areas you vacated, observe the less meteorologically gifted animals scrambling for shelter, and experience the satisfaction of someone whose careful observation and analytical skills have provided a practical advantage. The second time you get caught in a surprise downpour because you were too busy feeling smugly competent to notice the obvious storm clouds, you develop a healthy respect for meteorological humility. The rain soaks through your hide with the persistence of water that has no respect for your elevated opinion of your own forecasting abilities, and you spend the rest of the afternoon learning that confidence is most useful when balanced with continued attention to actual conditions. Adulthood creeps up on you like a very slow sunrise, arriving with such gradual subtlety that you don't notice the transition until you realize that your daily concerns have shifted from figuring out how to operate your own body to figuring out how to operate your own life. One morning you wake up and realize you've stopped growing taller and started growing more competent, which is arguably more useful but considerably less dramatic. The physical changes are subtle but significant. Your coordination has improved to the point where you can walk across uneven terrain without conducting internal negotiations about which leg moves next. Your neck has learned to work in partnership with your head, rather than as a separate entity with its own agenda. Your spots have settled into their permanent pattern, creating a unique identification system that other giraffes can recognize from considerable distances. You've developed your own techniques for the daily challenges of giraffe life, personal solutions to universal problems that reflect your individual approach to the engineering challenges of being extremely tall. Drinking water now involves a routine that's part yoga, part engineering, and part performance art, but it's your routine, refined through practice, and adapted to your particular proportions and preferences. You've perfected the art of the elegant descent, which is to say, you've learned to fall gracefully when circumstances require rapid changes in altitude. This skill proves more useful than you initially expected, as the world is full of situations that require quick adjustments to height, low-hanging branches that appear suddenly, uneven ground that shifts underfoot, and the occasional need to duck below the flight path of large birds who haven't factored your height into their navigation calculations. Your mental map of the territory has evolved from a simple catalogue of food sources and water locations to a complex understanding of seasonal variations, weather patterns, and the behavioral cycles of the other creatures who share your environment. You've lived through enough dry seasons to know which trees hold their leaves longest, and enough wet seasons to know which watering holes turn into mud pits that require extraction assistance. The knowledge you've accumulated includes not just where things are, but when they're worth visiting. The best browse varies with the seasons and the rainfall patterns. Water sources change course, dry up, or become overcrowded depending on conditions that require constant monitoring and periodic reassessment. The younger giraffes in the area have started watching you with the mixture of respect and bewilderment that you once reserved for the adults. They observe your browsing techniques with the careful attention of students studying for an exam they hope never to take. They note your route choices and timing decisions with the concentration of creatures who recognize expertise when they see it, even when they don't fully understand the principles behind it. You find yourself unconsciously demonstrating proper leaf selection techniques and optimal scratching post utilization. Somewhere along the way, you've become the giraffe equivalent of a local expert, though you're not entirely sure when this transformation occurred or whether you're actually qualified for the role. Your place in the loose hierarchy of the area has settled into something comfortable. You're not the dominant male. That position belongs to an older giraffe who approaches every interaction with the weary competence of someone who's already solved all these problems twice. But you're not the newcomer either. You're established, respectable, possibly even wise, though you're not entirely sure how that happened. The social dynamics of adult giraffes operate with less drama than the adolescent negotiations, but more complexity than the simple hierarchies you once imagined. There are territorial boundaries that shift with the seasons, resource-sharing agreements that operate according to unspoken rules, and a network of mutual assistance that activates during emergencies without anyone having to organize it. A drought year tests everyone's carefully planned territories and resource allocation strategies. Water becomes scarce, good browse becomes scarcer, and the social dynamics shift like sand in wind. Traditional boundaries blur as everyone moves toward the remaining reliable water sources. The careful distance that normally characterizes giraffe social interaction gives way to unprecedented proximity as the available territory shrinks. You find yourself sharing resources with giraffes you'd previously maintained a polite distance from, and discovering that survival often requires the kind of cooperation that nobody talks about but everyone understands. The competition for resources is balanced by the recognition that helping others survive the difficult season ultimately benefits everyone by maintaining the community structure that provides security and shared knowledge. You've learned to read the landscape like a very tall, very slow newspaper. The behavior of the smaller animals tells you about predator movements, when the gazelles cluster nervously, when the ground squirrels abandon their normal territories, when the birds alter their flight patterns to avoid areas that have become dangerous. The state of the vegetation tells you about rainfall patterns, both recent and anticipated. The color and texture of the grass indicates soil moisture levels. The leaf production of the trees reflects underground water sources and seasonal variations that affect long-term browsing prospects. The position of the termite mounds tells you about underground water sources that aren't visible from the surface. The direction of their air vents indicates prevailing wind patterns that affect everything from weather prediction to the movement of scents that carry information about distant events. You've become less of an individual animal and more of a walking environmental monitoring station, constantly collecting and processing information that helps you navigate the complex challenges of survival in an environment where conditions change constantly and small miscalculations can have significant consequences. Courtship, when it happens, is less like the nature documentaries and more like a very tall, very awkward dance where everyone's pretending they know the steps. The documentaries suggest that animal romance follows predictable patterns of display and response, but the reality involves considerably more improvisation and significantly more opportunities for embarrassment. She appears during the good season, when the rains have been generous and the acacia trees are heavy with fresh growth. The timing is probably not coincidental. Successful romance requires adequate nutrition and the kind of energy surplus that only comes when basic survival needs are comfortably met. She's got spots arranged in a pattern that suggests either excellent genetics or a very good sense of humor, and she moves through your territory with the casual confidence of someone who knows exactly how good she looks doing it. Her presence changes the dynamic of your daily routine in ways you hadn't anticipated. Suddenly, your browsing choices require consideration of optimal viewing angles and strategic positioning. Your scratching post utilization becomes a performance that needs to demonstrate both your familiarity with the best locations and your consideration for shared resources. Your attempts at impressive behavior involve a lot of strategic leaf reaching and casual neck stretching, activities that you hope communicate your superior height and browsing skills without appearing to be deliberate displays. You position yourself near the best trees at optimal viewing angles, like a very tall, very subtle advertisement for your superior resource management and territorial knowledge. The challenge of giraffe courtship lies in appearing simultaneously impressive and approachable, demonstrating competence without seeming to try too hard, and maintaining the kind of dignified casualness that suggests you're always this accomplished, rather than making special efforts for her benefit. What follows is a series of parallel grazing sessions, carefully choreographed to look completely coincidental. You happen to be feeding in the same area where she's conducting her morning browse. She happens to need water at the same time you've scheduled your daily drink. You both happen to enjoy the same scratching trees, though never simultaneously, because that would be presumptuous and might suggest that you're deliberately timing your activities to coincide with hers. The courtship dance operates according to rules that seem designed to test patience and observational skills. Each interaction requires careful interpretation. Is her presence in your favorite browsing area a sign of interest, or simply evidence that you have good taste in trees? Does her willingness to share water sources indicate romantic potential, or just practical resource management? The actual moment of connection happens, as these things often do, during a completely mundane activity that no one could have planned or orchestrated. You're both reaching for the same cluster of leaves when a dust devil whirls through the area, covering everything in a fine layer of savanna seasoning that turns the morning browse into an impromptu earth tone makeover. You both pause, leaves dangling from your mouths, looking like the kind of photograph that would win an award for capturing the essential absurdity of existence. The dust settles in your eyelashes and coats your tongues with grit that makes the leaves taste like disappointment mixed with geological processes. She snorts, a sound somewhere between laughter and resignation. You respond with your own version of the same sentiment, a noise that acknowledges both the ridiculousness of the situation and the shared experience of being very tall animals in a world that occasionally treats everyone with equal disregard for dignity. It's not the most romantic moment in natural history, but it's honest, and sometimes that's better than romantic. The connection that forms is based on the recognition that you're both dealing with the same basic challenges and finding similar approaches to solving them, which provides a foundation for partnership that goes beyond mere physical attraction. The relationship that develops is less about grand gestures and more about compatible browsing preferences and synchronized drinking schedules. You discover that she has opinions about optimal leaf texture that differ from yours in subtle but important ways. She prefers the younger leaves that require more energy to reach, while you've developed a taste for the mature leaves that offer more substantial nutrition per unit of effort expended. You learn to appreciate her technique for dealing with thorny branches, which involves a delicate balance of persistence and strategic withdrawal that you find both admirable and slightly intimidating. She approaches challenging browse with the kind of careful planning that suggests she's thought through multiple strategies and selected the one most likely to succeed. Together, you establish a routine that works for both of you, combining the benefits of partnership with the independence that both of you value. Morning browsing happens in companionable silence, with occasional exchanges of information about tree conditions and weather prospects. The shared knowledge improves both of your survival prospects, while maintaining the individual autonomy that makes the relationship feel like a choice rather than a necessity. Afternoon rest periods are synchronized for maximum shade efficiency, with careful positioning that allows both of you to benefit from the available shelter while maintaining comfortable personal space. Evening territorial patrols are conducted as casual walks that happen to cover all the important areas, providing security monitoring that benefits from two sets of eyes and ears while appearing to be simply a pleasant way to end the day. The partnership settles into the kind of comfortable routine that suggests it might be sustainable over the long term, which in giraffe years means something considerably more significant than short-term romantic attachment. You've found someone whose approach to the daily challenges of being extremely tall complements your own strategies while providing the kind of companionship that makes even routine activities more interesting. The years settle into a rhythm as reliable as seasonal rains, each cycle bringing familiar challenges and expected rewards that you've learned to anticipate with the accuracy of someone who's been observing the same patterns for longer than many creatures live. The urgency that once characterized every decision has given way to something that might be called wisdom, though it feels more like the accumulated weight of experience applied to problems that no longer seem as complicated as they once did. You've become the kind of giraffe that other giraffes nod to respectfully but don't feel the need to challenge. Your height, which once seemed like a liability that required constant management, has settled into an asset that provides advantages in everything from weather prediction to territorial surveillance. Other giraffes recognize your established status through subtle signals, the confidence of your movement, the efficiency of your browsing patterns, the casual way you occupy space that clearly belongs to you. Your territory has expanded to include several prime feeding areas, each selected through years of careful evaluation and strategic acquisition. The original 3 trees that constituted your first hopeful territory have become the nucleus of a more substantial domain that includes the eastern acacia grove, where the morning light creates optimal photosynthesis conditions, the rocky outcropping that provides both scratching opportunities and elevation for threat assessment, and the sheltered valley where the best grass grows thick during the wet season. The reliable water source that anchors your territory represents perhaps your greatest achievement in resource management. It's a seasonal stream that maintains flow longer than most, fed by underground springs that you discovered during a particularly dry year when desperation drove you to explore areas that other giraffes had dismissed as unpromising. The water runs clear over smooth stones, creating small pools that accommodate drinking without requiring the kind of engineering project that characterizes less optimal water sources. What you consider to be the best view in the neighborhood stretches from your primary observation post across miles of savanna that reveal their secrets to someone with the patience to watch and the height to see beyond the immediate obstacles. From this vantage point, you can monitor weather systems developing on distant horizons, track the movement of herds that indicate seasonal changes in grazing pressure, and observe the subtle shifts in vegetation that signal underground water movement or the approach of dry seasons. Your days follow patterns that would seem boring to a creature with a shorter lifespan but feel comfortably efficient to you. There's something deeply satisfying about having solved the basic problems of existence well enough that you can focus on optimization rather than crisis management. The routine you've developed maximizes nutrition while minimizing energy expenditure, provides adequate security without paranoid hypervigilance, and maintains social connections without unnecessary drama. Morning begins with the methodical browsing of the eastern acacia grove, where the leaves catch the best light and have spent the night concentrating sugars that make them more nutritious and more flavorful than browse available at other times and locations. You've learned to read the subtle variations in leaf, color, and texture that indicate optimal harvesting conditions, timing your arrival to coincide with peak nutritional value while avoiding the midday heat that wilts the more delicate growth. The grove consists of 7 mature acacias arranged in a rough semicircle that creates natural windbreaks and varied microclimates. Each tree has its own character and seasonal cycle. The largest produces the most browse, but requires careful navigation around defensive thorns that have grown more formidable with age. The youngest grows fast and enthusiastically, but tends toward leaves that are more tender than substantial, requiring larger quantities to provide adequate nutrition. The trees in between offer various compromises between quantity and quality, accessibility and nutritional density. You've learned to rotate your browsing pattern according to seasonal variations, weather conditions, and your own nutritional needs, creating a feeding schedule that maintains tree health while maximizing your own dietary requirements. Mid-morning involves strategic positioning for optimal sun exposure while maintaining vigilance for potential threats that never materialize but could, theoretically, require rapid response. This period serves multiple functions beyond simple sunbathing. The warmth helps with digestion of the morning browse, the elevated position provides surveillance opportunities, and the regular routine establishes your presence in the territory for the benefit of neighbors who need to know that the area remains under active management. The positioning itself has become an art form refined through years of practice. You've identified the spots that provide the best combination of sun exposure, wind protection, and sightlines for threat detection. The routine varies with the seasons as the sun's angle changes and different locations become optimal for temperature regulation and territorial display. During this mid-morning period, you conduct the daily census of your territory's other residents. The weaver bird colony has expanded from the original negotiated shared tree arrangement to a complex apartment building that spans 3 trees and houses multiple generations of birds who've grown up considering you a permanent fixture of their landscape. The birds provide services that you've come to depend upon, though the arrangement was never formally negotiated. They serve as an early warning system for weather changes, their sensitive atmospheric pressure detection giving you advance notice of storm systems that your own weather reading skills might miss. They also provide running commentary on the activities of smaller mammals, whose romantic dramas and territorial disputes create a form of entertainment that helps pass the slower parts of the day. Noon brings the daily engineering project of obtaining water while maintaining dignity. Despite years of practice, drinking remains a complex undertaking that requires careful planning and precise execution. The approach to the water source involves route selection that minimizes exposure during the vulnerable moments when your head is down and your attention is focused on hydration rather than threat detection. You've developed a pre-drinking routine that includes perimeter assessment, wind direction analysis, and positioning optimization. The actual drinking process has been refined to minimize the time spent in the awkward position required for someone of your height to reach ground-level water sources, while maximizing water intake efficiency and maintaining the kind of graceful appearance that befits someone of your established status. The water itself tastes different depending on seasonal conditions, recent rainfall, and upstream activities. You've learned to read these variations as information sources about environmental conditions beyond your immediate territory. Muddy water suggests heavy rains in the hills. Unusual mineral content indicates changes in underground flow patterns. The presence or absence of certain microscopic life forms provides data about the overall health of the watershed. The younger generation arrives with what you're beginning to recognize as the eternal optimism of creatures who haven't yet learned that most problems don't actually have solutions, just management strategies that work better or worse, depending on circumstances that remain largely outside anyone's direct control. Their confidence in their ability to solve problems through determination and clever thinking reminds you of your own early assumptions about the relationship between effort and results. Your first unofficial student is a young female who appears during migration season with excellent instincts and terrible execution. She possesses the kind of natural intelligence that allows her to identify the best browse from impressive distances, recognizing optimal leaf quality and nutritional density through subtle visual cues that many giraffes never learn to read effectively. Her theoretical understanding of territorial boundaries demonstrates sophisticated grasp of social dynamics and resource management principles. The problem lies in the gap between her theoretical knowledge and practical application. She can identify the best browse from impressive distances, but consistently chooses the most inefficient routes to reach it, apparently believing that direct approaches are always superior to strategic planning. Her route selection ignores terrain considerations, wind patterns that could carry her scent to potential threats, and the social dynamics that make some paths acceptable while rendering others diplomatically problematic. She understands territorial boundaries in theory, but seems to believe they don't apply to her personally, operating under the assumption that her obvious intelligence and good intentions provide exemption from the social protocols that govern interactions between established territory holders and younger giraffes seeking access to resources. Her questions reveal both the breadth of her curiosity and the gaps in her practical education. She wants to know not just how to accomplish specific tasks, but why certain techniques work better than others, what principles guide decision-making in complex situations, and how experienced giraffes develop the judgment that allows them to navigate challenges that have no obvious solutions. You find yourself demonstrating techniques that you learned through years of trial and error, trying to compress decades of experience into lessons that can be absorbed before the next mistake happens. The teaching process requires you to articulate knowledge that you've internalized to the point where conscious thought is no longer required, breaking down automatic responses into steps that can be explained and practiced. How to read wind patterns for predator scent becomes a lesson in atmospheric dynamics and olfactory analysis that involves understanding air pressure changes, thermal currents created by terrain features, and the persistence characteristics of different scent molecules under various humidity conditions. The practical application requires constant monitoring of subtle environmental cues that provide early warning of potential threats approaching from distances too great for visual detection. How to identify which trees are worth the energy expenditure involves complex calculations that account for nutritional density, accessibility factors, seasonal variations in leaf quality, and competitive pressure from other browsers. The decision-making process includes assessment of travel costs, vulnerability during feeding, and the opportunity costs of choosing one feeding location over alternatives that might provide different combinations of benefits and risks. How to drink efficiently without creating a splash that attracts unwanted attention requires understanding of hydrodynamics, predator behavior, and the acoustic properties of different water sources. The technique involves approach angle optimization, timing coordination with environmental noise sources, and positioning strategies that minimize the duration of vulnerability while maximizing water intake. She follows you at what she thinks is a respectful distance, which is approximately the distance that makes casual conversation possible. Your attempts at maintaining dignified silence are undermined by her questions, which range from practical to philosophical, to the kind of observations that make you realize you've stopped noticing things you once found remarkable. Her practical questions focus on immediate challenges and specific techniques. How do you know which leaves are ready? Requires explanation of the visual and tactile cues that indicate optimal nutritional content, the seasonal timing that affects plant biochemistry, and the individual variations between trees that require customized assessment for each feeding location. How do you time your approach to the water source? involves discussion of predator behavior patterns, the daily activity cycles of other animals that use the same water source, and the environmental factors that affect visibility and acoustic conditions during different parts of the day. Why do you pause in that particular spot during your morning routine? Leads to analysis of sight lines, wind patterns, escape routes, and the psychological benefits of predictable routines that provide structure while maintaining flexibility for adaptation to changing conditions. Her philosophical questions probe deeper issues about the nature of giraffe existence and the meaning of survival strategies that have evolved over millions of years. Do you think the acacia's mind being eaten opens discussions about ecological relationships, the co-evolution of browsers and browse species, and the balance between individual survival needs and ecosystem health? What's the point of establishing territory if you're just going to share it during drought years? Requires exploration of the differences between crisis management and normal operations, the role of social cooperation in survival, and the long-term benefits of sustainable resource management versus short-term competitive advantages. Do you ever wonder what it would be like to be shorter? Leads to philosophical speculation about the advantages and disadvantages of different evolutionary strategies, the relationship between physical capabilities and environmental challenges, and the question of whether individuals can meaningfully evaluate the optimality of their own design. Her observational questions are perhaps the most challenging because they force you to examine behaviors that have become so automatic that you've stopped thinking about them consciously. Why do you pause like that before drinking? Requires analysis of pre-drinking assessment routines that you perform without conscious thought, safety protocols that have become reflexive, and positioning strategies that you execute automatically based on environmental cues you process below the threshold of conscious awareness. Why do you always approach that tree from the same direction? Leads to discussion of route optimization based on factors you evaluate unconsciously, habit patterns that provide efficiency benefits, and security considerations that have become integrated into automatic behavioral responses. What are you looking for when you stare at the horizon like that? Involves explanation of weather monitoring techniques, threat assessment protocols, and the constant environmental surveillance that experienced giraffes maintain as background activities during routine daily functions. The teaching process reveals the complexity of knowledge that you've accumulated through years of experience and the difficulty of transferring practical wisdom to someone who hasn't yet developed the experiential framework needed to understand why certain approaches work better than others in specific situations. You've reached the age where your survival strategies are no longer just about you. The routes you've established through years of exploration and optimization have become pathways that other giraffes use for their own travel needs. The relationships you've maintained with neighbors and other territory holders create a network of cooperation and information sharing that benefits everyone who participates in the system. The territories you've secured through negotiation and sustainable management practices provide resources not just for your own survival, but for the community of giraffes, who depend on access to reliable water sources and quality browse areas during seasonal migrations and emergency situations. Your knowledge of environmental conditions, predator behavior patterns, and resource availability has become a community asset that influences survival prospects for giraffes throughout your area. The responsibility of possessing this knowledge includes decisions about how and when to share information that could mean the difference between survival and death for other members of your community. A severe drought tests everyone's accumulated wisdom and forces difficult decisions about resource allocation and information sharing. The crisis develops gradually, with rainfall patterns that suggest a normal dry season initially, but continue longer than usual without the transitional rains that typically provide relief before conditions become critical. Water sources that normally maintain adequate flow throughout the dry season begin to fail as underground reserves drop below levels needed to sustain surface springs. Trees that usually retain leaves long enough to provide browse during difficult periods begin dropping foliage early as they conserve resources for survival rather than continued growth. The social dynamics of the giraffe community shift as traditional territorial boundaries become meaningless in the face of universal need for access to the few remaining reliable resources. Established hierarchies and resource-sharing agreements require renegotiation as scarcity makes previous arrangements unsustainable. You find yourself making decisions not just about your own survival, but about which information to share and when to reveal knowledge that could help others survive the crisis. The emergency water source you discovered years ago during your own difficult season represents a resource that could provide life-saving hydration for other giraffes. But revealing its location permanently alters the resource dynamics in your area. The decision involves complex calculations that balance immediate humanitarian concerns with long-term sustainability considerations. Sharing the water source helps individuals survive the current crisis, but increases competitive pressure on a resource that may not be adequate for everyone who needs it. Maintaining exclusive access preserves the resource for future emergencies, but allows preventable suffering during the current crisis. How do you balance the needs of your established community, the giraffes who've participated in reciprocal resource-sharing arrangements and cooperative territorial management, with the younger giraffes who arrive desperate and unprepared, seeking help from anyone who might have the knowledge and resources needed for survival? The young females you've been teaching represent a particular challenge because their survival depends not just on access to emergency resources, but on the knowledge needed to navigate future crises independently. Providing short-term assistance without developing their own capabilities creates dependency relationships that could prove harmful during future emergencies when you might not be available to provide guidance. Your response to the drought crisis becomes a test of the principles you've developed about community responsibility and resource stewardship. The decisions you make establish precedents that influence how future crises are managed and determine whether the informal cooperation networks that have evolved in your area can survive the stress of extreme scarcity. The solution you develop involves graduated information sharing that provides assistance while encouraging development of independent capabilities. You reveal the location of your emergency water source, but accompany the information with education about the signs that indicate reliable water sources, the exploration techniques needed to discover additional resources, and the sustainable use practices that preserve resources for future needs. The approach creates short-term hardship, as giraffes must invest time and energy in learning resource location skills rather than simply being directed to known resources, but it builds community capabilities that improve long-term survival prospects for everyone who participates in the learning process. The educational component of your crisis response extends beyond simple information sharing to include practical training in the skills needed for independent resource management. You demonstrate the geological signs that indicate underground water sources, the vegetation patterns that suggest seasonal springs, and the landscape features that create reliable microclimates during extreme weather conditions. The training process requires balancing the urgency of immediate survival needs with the longer-term benefits of capability development. Some giraffes need immediate access to resources with minimal delay for educational activities, while others can benefit from extended learning opportunities that improve their future survival prospects. Your teaching methods adapt to the crisis conditions, focusing on essential skills that provide immediate survival benefits while laying the foundation for more advanced learning that can continue after the emergency passes. The curriculum includes rapid assessment techniques for evaluating potential water sources, emergency browse identification for plants that provide adequate nutrition when preferred foods become unavailable, and crisis navigation skills for traveling safely during conditions that alter normal environmental cues. The mentorship role that you've developed extends beyond individual teaching relationships to encompass community leadership responsibilities that influence survival prospects for the entire local giraffe population. Your decisions about resource allocation and information sharing create ripple effects that determine how successfully the community navigates the crisis and what capabilities remain available for future challenges. There's something deeply satisfying about watching a young giraffe successfully navigate a challenge using techniques you taught them. Not the dramatic satisfaction of heroic action, but the quiet contentment of seeing a system work as intended. The satisfaction comes not from personal recognition, but from evidence that knowledge transfer has been successful and that community capabilities have been enhanced. The young female who initially struggled with route optimization demonstrates mastery of terrain analysis by selecting an approach path to a new water source that minimizes energy expenditure while maximizing security. Her success represents validation of the teaching methods you've developed and confirmation that practical wisdom can be transmitted effectively when students are motivated to learn. Another student applies the predator scent detection techniques you taught to identify lion presence near a feeding area, allowing early warning that prevents a potentially dangerous encounter. The successful application of theoretical knowledge to practical survival challenges demonstrates that the educational process has created genuine capability enhancement rather than mere information transfer. The most significant satisfaction comes from observing students who've progressed beyond simple application of taught techniques to develop their own innovations and improvements. A young male combines your water source evaluation methods with his own discoveries about geological indicators to locate a previously unknown spring that provides reliable water throughout the drought. The innovation represents successful knowledge transfer that creates new capabilities rather than simple reproduction of existing techniques. The student has internalized the principles behind the methods well enough to apply them creatively to novel situations, generating solutions that extend beyond what direct teaching could have provided. These teaching successes create a legacy that extends beyond your own survival to encompass enhanced community capabilities that will benefit future generations of giraffes who inherit the knowledge network you've helped establish. The informal educational system that has developed around your mentorship activities creates a mechanism for preserving and transmitting practical wisdom that might otherwise be lost when experienced individuals are no longer available to provide guidance. The satisfaction of successful teaching is balanced by the recognition that mentorship responsibilities continue indefinitely. Each generation of students eventually becomes teachers themselves, but the need for guidance and knowledge transfer remains constant as new challenges emerge and environmental conditions continue to change. Your role in the community has evolved from individual survival and territory management to encompass broader responsibilities for community welfare and knowledge preservation. The expertise you've developed through years of experience has become a community resource that influences survival prospects for giraffes throughout your area, creating obligations that extend far beyond your original goals of securing adequate resources for your own survival. The mentorship relationships you've developed provide personal satisfaction while serving community needs that help ensure the continuation of practical wisdom and effective survival strategies for future generations. The balance between individual needs and community responsibilities has become the defining characteristic of your mature adult life, shaping daily decisions and long-term planning in ways that reflect the accumulated weight of experience and the recognition of interdependence that characterizes successful communities. The teaching process continues to provide learning opportunities for you as well as your students. Explaining techniques and principles that you've internalized forces conscious examination of automatic behaviors, often revealing aspects of your own knowledge that you hadn't fully recognized or articulated. The questions that students ask probe assumptions and explore implications that extend your understanding of your own expertise. Student innovations and improvements to taught techniques provide feedback that enhances your own capabilities while demonstrating the creative potential that emerges when solid foundational knowledge is combined with fresh perspectives and novel approaches to familiar challenges. The teaching relationship becomes a source of mutual learning that benefits both instructor and student while strengthening community capabilities. The mentorship role you've assumed represents a natural evolution of the survival expertise you've developed, transforming individual knowledge into community assets that enhance collective survival prospects while providing personal satisfaction and continued opportunities for learning and growth. The responsibilities are substantial, but they create meaning and purpose that extend beyond simple individual survival to encompass contribution to something larger and more enduring than any single giraffe's lifespan. Age creeps up on you like a very polite predator, announcing its presence well in advance and allowing you time to adjust your expectations accordingly. Unlike the sudden crises that once demanded immediate responses and rapid adaptations, aging operates on a timeline that provides ample opportunity for graceful accommodation of changing capabilities and evolving needs. The first signs manifest as subtle shifts in daily routines that initially seem like minor preferences rather than necessary adaptations. You find yourself choosing routes that avoid the steepest terrain, not because you can't navigate challenging landscapes, but because the energy expenditure no longer seems worth the marginal benefits of optimal positioning. Your timing for various activities shifts to accommodate joints that require longer warm-up periods and muscles that benefit from more gradual transitions between rest and activity. Your joints begin conducting weather forecasting services, predicting rain with accuracy that would make meteorologists jealous. The ache in your left front knee provides reliable 12-hour advance warning of approaching storm systems, while the stiffness in your neck joints offers detailed predictions about humidity changes and atmospheric pressure variations. This newfound meteorological sensitivity proves useful for planning activities and selecting shelter, though the constant weather updates can become somewhat overwhelming during seasons with frequently changing conditions. Your morning routine expands to include a comprehensive stretching regimen that you tell yourself is preventive maintenance rather than necessity. The ritual begins before dawn with careful neck extensions that work out the stiffness accumulated during sleep, progresses through leg stretches that address the joint restrictions that develop overnight, and concludes with a series of movements that restore the flexibility needed for efficient daily activities. The stretching routine serves multiple purposes beyond simple physical preparation. It provides a structured beginning to each day that helps establish mental readiness for whatever challenges might arise. The quiet time before other animals become active offers opportunities for environmental assessment and planning that prove increasingly valuable as your physical capabilities require more strategic approaches to routine activities. The routine also serves as a form of meditation that helps you process the accumulated experiences and wisdom of decades of survival. The repetitive movements create a peaceful mental state that facilitates reflection on long-term patterns and the broader meaning of individual experiences within the context of lifetime learning and community contribution. The younger giraffes in the area have stopped looking to you for guidance and started offering it instead, with the kind of gentle insistence that suggests they've noticed things you haven't admitted to yourself yet. Their offers of assistance arrive diplomatically, framed as requests for your company rather than expressions of concern about your capabilities. But the underlying message is clear. They've observed changes in your behavior that indicate increasing vulnerability. Their concern manifests in subtle ways that preserve your dignity while providing practical support. They position themselves near your territory during times when predator activity increases, creating an informal security network that enhances everyone's safety while providing you with additional protection during your most vulnerable moments. They share information about resource conditions and environmental changes that might affect your travel routes or feeding schedules, presenting updates as casual conversation rather than formal briefings. The transition from teacher to someone who occasionally needs teaching occurs so gradually that you barely notice the role reversal until it's well established. The young giraffes who once sought your advice about territorial management and survival strategies now offer suggestions about route optimization and weather timing, presenting their recommendations with the same respectful deference you once used when learning from your elders. Your favorite scratching tree develops a wear pattern that accommodates your preferred angles, and you realize you've been using the same spot for longer than some of the other animals have been alive. The bark has been polished smooth by decades of regular use, creating a surface that conforms perfectly to your body's contours and provides optimal relief for the specific itches that plague giraffes of your age and height. The tree itself has grown and changed during your years of association with it, developing new branch configurations that affect its utility as a scratching post while maintaining the essential characteristics that make it suitable for your needs. The relationship between you and the tree represents a form of co-evolution, with your usage patterns influencing the tree's growth, while the tree's development has shaped your scratching techniques and preferences. The realization that you've been using the same tree for longer than some animals have been alive provides perspective on the passage of time and the continuity of your presence in this particular corner of the savannah. You've become a permanent fixture in the landscape, as established and reliable as the geological features that define the territory's basic structure. Your territory begins to feel less like something you actively defend and more like something you happen to occupy. The boundaries that once required careful maintenance now seem to maintain themselves through mutual understanding and established routine. Neighboring giraffes respect the territorial limits not because they fear confrontation, but because the current arrangement works well for everyone involved, and change would require more energy than anyone wants to invest. The shift from active territorial management to passive occupation reflects changes in both your own capabilities and the social dynamics of the local giraffe community. Younger giraffes have established their own territories and social relationships, creating a stable network of boundaries and resource-sharing agreements that reduces competitive pressure on established territories like yours. The territorial boundaries themselves have become less rigid and more fluid, adapting to seasonal variations and resource availability through informal negotiations that occur without dramatic confrontations or formal agreements. During abundant seasons, boundaries expand to encompass additional resources. During scarce periods, territories contract and overlap increases as everyone focuses on accessing essential resources rather than maintaining exclusive control over marginal areas. The young male who challenged you years ago has matured into a competent neighbor who occasionally checks on your well-being with the careful casualness of someone pretending it's not deliberate. His visits arrive at irregular intervals that suggest spontaneity while consistently occurring during times when you might benefit from company or assistance. The conversations focus on environmental conditions and community news, providing information exchange while creating opportunities for him to assess your health and capabilities. His transformation from challenger to ally illustrates the evolution of social relationships within the giraffe community and the way that initial conflicts can develop into supportive partnerships when both parties mature and recognize their mutual interests in maintaining stable territorial arrangements. The territorial challenge that once seemed like a serious threat to your security has become the foundation for a relationship that enhances the safety and well-being of both participants. His concern for your welfare reflects the informal social safety net that develops within established giraffe communities, where experienced individuals receive protection and support from younger community members who benefit from the stability and knowledge that elders provide. The arrangement serves everyone's interests while maintaining the dignity and independence that remain important to aging giraffes who don't want to become burdens on their neighbors. The daily engineering project of drinking water becomes more complex, requiring longer recovery periods and more strategic timing. The physical mechanics of reaching ground-level water sources become more challenging as joint flexibility decreases and balance becomes less reliable. The process that once required careful planning now demands detailed preparation and extended recovery time that affects the scheduling of other daily activities. You develop new techniques for reaching high brows that compensate for reduced flexibility with increased efficiency. Your approach to feeding evolves from the athletic reach and grab methods of your youth to more calculated strategies that minimize physical stress while maximizing nutritional return. You learn to use gravity and momentum to assist with movements that once relied entirely on muscular strength and joint flexibility. The feeding techniques you develop during this period represent the culmination of decades of experience applied to the challenge of maintaining adequate nutrition despite physical limitations. The methods require greater patience and more careful planning than previous approaches, but they provide reliable access to quality browse without creating injury risks or excessive fatigue. Your walking pace settles into something that could charitably be called contemplative. The urgent stride that once carried you efficiently across long distances gives way to a measured gait that prioritizes stability and energy conservation over speed and efficiency. The change in pace affects your daily range and the distance you can comfortably travel for feeding and social activities, requiring adjustments to territorial arrangements and resource access strategies. The slower pace also changes your relationship with the landscape and your awareness of environmental details that were previously observed only in passing. The extended time required to move between locations provides opportunities for more detailed observation of seasonal changes, animal behavior patterns, and ecological relationships that contribute to your understanding of the complex systems that support savanna life. The contemplative pace becomes a source of unexpected pleasure as you discover aspects of your familiar territory that were previously overlooked during more hurried passages. The texture of grass under your feet, the patterns of light and shadow created by different atmospheric conditions, the subtle variations in topography that create microclimates and habitat variations all become more apparent when experienced at a pace that allows for careful attention and appreciation. Your perspective shifts from immediate concerns to longer patterns, the accumulated experience of decades, providing a temporal framework that places current events within broader contexts of cyclical change and historical continuity. You begin to see individual seasons as part of larger cycles, individual challenges as variations on themes you've encountered before, recognizing patterns that repeat across multiple temporal scales while remaining alert to the genuine novelties that distinguish each specific experience from its predecessors. The urgency that once drove your daily decisions gives way to something that might be wisdom or might just be fatigue, it's sometimes difficult to tell the difference. The reduced pressure to make immediate decisions about every minor challenge creates mental space for reflection and analysis that was previously consumed by the demands of constant problem-solving and crisis management. This shift in temporal perspective provides insights into the relationship between short-term actions and long-term consequences that were less apparent when immediate survival concerns dominated your attention. You begin to understand how individual decisions contribute to larger patterns of behavior and environmental change, recognizing connections between cause and effect that operate across timescales longer than the immediate feedback loops that guide most daily activities. The distinction between wisdom and fatigue becomes less important than the practical benefits that emerge from both sources. Whether your increased patience results from accumulated understanding or decreased energy reserves, it provides advantages in situations that require careful observation and measured responses rather than immediate action and rapid adaptation. The reflective capacity that develops during this period becomes one of the unexpected benefits of aging, compensating for some of the physical limitations through enhanced understanding of patterns and relationships that provide strategic advantages in navigating familiar challenges. The wisdom you've accumulated becomes a resource that can be applied to problems that would have required purely physical solutions during your younger years. The landscape itself has changed during your lifetime, transformations that were too gradual to notice during their occurrence, but become apparent when viewed from the perspective of decades rather than seasons. Trees you remember as saplings now provide shade for the next generation, their growth marking the passage of time in ways that are more reliable than seasonal cycles or weather patterns. The acacia grove that served as your primary feeding area during your early adult years has matured into a complex ecosystem that supports multiple generations of trees and a diverse community of other species. The young trees that once provided tender browse have grown into established specimens with their own characteristic growth patterns and seasonal cycles, while new saplings have established themselves in the spaces created by the mature forest canopy. Watering holes have shifted course, dried up, or been replaced by new ones as geological processes and changing rainfall patterns alter the hydrology of your territory. Springs that once provided reliable water during dry seasons have failed due to changes in underground water flow, while new sources have appeared in locations that were previously unsuitable for water access. The patterns of migration and territory that seemed permanent when you learned them have adapted to new realities created by environmental changes and shifts in population dynamics. Routes that were optimal for previous generations of giraffes have become less suitable. As vegetation patterns change and water sources move, requiring the development of new pathways and resource networks that serve current conditions rather than historical precedents. These environmental changes provide concrete evidence of the dynamic nature of systems that once seemed stable and unchanging. The landscape you've known throughout your life reveals itself as a continuously evolving entity that adapts to changing conditions, while maintaining essential characteristics that support the basic requirements of savanna life. Your observations of environmental change over extended time periods provide unique insights into ecological processes that operate too slowly to be apparent to younger animals or creatures with shorter lifespans. You've witnessed complete cycles of forest succession, changes in species composition, and shifts in resource availability that demonstrate the resilience and adaptability of natural systems while highlighting the need for flexible survival strategies that can accommodate changing conditions. You've outlived several of the major players in the area's social dynamics, witnessing the complete life cycle of territorial arrangements and social hierarchies that once seemed as permanent as geographical features. The dominant male, who once seemed like a permanent fixture of the landscape, has been succeeded by his former challenger, who has in turn been succeeded by someone you remember learning to walk. The continuity you once took for granted reveals itself as an ongoing process of replacement and renewal, with each generation of giraffes filling roles and maintaining territories according to patterns that remain consistent even as the individual actors change. The social structure persists through individual mortality, demonstrating the institutional knowledge and behavioral patterns that allow communities to maintain stability despite constant turnover in membership. The succession of leadership roles within the giraffe community illustrates the importance of knowledge, transfer, and social learning in maintaining community capabilities across generations. Each new leader brings individual characteristics and innovative approaches to familiar challenges, creating evolution within continuity that allows adaptation to changing conditions while preserving essential community functions. Your role as an observer of these transitions provides insights into the mechanisms that maintain social stability and the factors that determine successful leadership succession. You've watched promising individuals fail to establish sustainable territorial arrangements while observing others with less obvious advantages develop into effective community leaders through patience, persistence, and willingness to learn from experienced neighbors. The patterns of succession and community development that you've observed over decades provide a framework for understanding your own position within the larger temporal context of giraffe society. Your current status as an elder representative of community knowledge and experience represents a temporary role in an ongoing process that will continue long after your individual contribution has ended. Your unofficial students have become teachers themselves, passing on techniques and knowledge that originated with you but have been refined and adapted through their own experiences. The teaching methods you developed through trial and error have been modified and improved by students who brought different perspectives and innovative approaches to familiar problems, creating evolved versions of your original instruction that serve current conditions more effectively than historical methods. The knowledge transfer process demonstrates the way that individual expertise becomes community wisdom through successive generations of learning and teaching. Your personal discoveries and innovations have been integrated into a collective knowledge base that serves community needs while transcending the limitations of any individual's experience or lifespan. The evolution of your teaching methods through successive generations of students illustrates the dynamic nature of knowledge systems and the importance of allowing information to adapt and change as it passes from one generation to the next. The rigid preservation of historical methods would have prevented the innovations and improvements that make current versions more effective than original approaches. Your roots have become established paths used by giraffes who never knew they were following in your footsteps. The exploration and route optimization work you conducted during your prime adult years has resulted in pathway networks that serve the transportation needs of the entire local giraffe community, providing efficient access to resources while minimizing exposure to risks and hazards. The transformation of individual exploration into community infrastructure represents one of the most significant contributions that experienced giraffes make to the welfare of future generations. The time and energy invested in discovering optimal routes and evaluating alternative pathways creates permanent benefits that continue to serve community needs long after the original explorer is no longer able to travel the distances required for route maintenance and improvement. The pathway networks you established reflect decades of accumulated knowledge about terrain conditions, seasonal variations, security considerations, and resource access requirements. The routes represent solutions to complex optimization problems that balance multiple competing objectives, including travel efficiency, safety, resource access, and environmental impact. The water source you discovered during the drought has become part of the community's emergency resource network, its location and access procedures integrated into the collective knowledge that guides community response to crisis conditions. New arrivals are directed there by giraffes who learned its location from giraffes who learned it from you, creating a chain of knowledge transfer that ensures critical survival information remains available even when original sources are no longer present to provide direct instruction. Your private discovery has become collective knowledge, which is probably more useful than keeping it secret would have been. The transition from individual resource to community asset illustrates the way that personal achievements can serve broader purposes when shared appropriately, creating benefits that extend far beyond the original discoverer's immediate needs. The integration of your discovery into community emergency procedures demonstrates the importance of knowledge sharing in maintaining community resilience and the role that individual contributions play in building collective capabilities. The water source provides insurance against future crises, while serving as an example of the way that individual exploration and discovery can create lasting benefits for entire communities. The knowledge transfer mechanisms that have preserved and transmitted information about your discovery illustrate the reliability of informal educational systems within giraffe communities. The information has been accurately transmitted through multiple generations of teachers and students without formal documentation or institutional oversight, demonstrating the effectiveness of experiential learning and oral tradition in preserving critical survival knowledge. Your final years settle into a routine that prioritizes comfort over efficiency, wisdom over ambition, the accumulated understanding of decades providing guidance for decisions that no longer require optimization for maximum productivity or competitive advantage. You've earned the right to choose your activities based on preference rather than necessity, which turns out to be both liberating and occasionally boring. The liberation comes from the recognition that most of the problems that once seemed urgent and critical were actually manageable through patient application of well-tested solutions rather than innovative approaches and dramatic interventions. The freedom to choose activities based on personal satisfaction rather than survival requirements opens possibilities for experiences that were previously unavailable due to time and energy constraints imposed by more pressing needs. The occasional boredom results from the recognition that many activities that once provided excitement and challenge have become routine through repetition and mastery. The territorial disputes that once created drama and uncertainty now play out according to predictable patterns that hold little suspense for someone who's witnessed the same scenarios countless times. The seasonal changes that once brought variety and novelty to daily routines have become familiar cycles that repeat with comfortable regularity but limited surprise. The balance between liberation and boredom creates opportunities for new forms of satisfaction that weren't available during more demanding periods of life. The reduced pressure to achieve specific objectives creates mental space for appreciation of experiences that were previously valued primarily for their instrumental benefits rather than their intrinsic qualities. Your territory shrinks to encompass only the essential elements: reliable water, quality browse, good shelter, and comfortable social distance from the younger giraffes who still believe that every day requires dramatic decisions. The territorial reduction reflects both practical limitations imposed by reduced mobility and deliberate choices about resource allocation that prioritize convenience and comfort over comprehensive resource control. The streamlined territory provides all the resources needed for comfortable survival while eliminating the maintenance requirements and security concerns that characterized your larger historical territory. The reduced scope allows more intensive utilization of preferred resources while decreasing the travel distances and energy expenditures required for daily activities. The comfortable social distance from younger giraffes reflects your preference for peaceful routines that aren't disrupted by the urgent concerns and frequent crises that characterize the daily lives of giraffes who are still establishing territories and developing survival skills. Their dramatic decisions and urgent problems provide entertainment when observed from a safe distance, but direct involvement in their affairs would create complications that you no longer have the energy or inclination to manage. Your daily routine becomes less about optimization and more about appreciation, the focus shifting from maximum efficiency in resource utilization to maximum satisfaction in daily experiences. The activities that comprise your day are selected based on their contribution to overall quality of life, rather than their instrumental value in achieving specific survival or territorial objectives. The routine that emerges reflects your accumulated understanding of which activities provide the most satisfaction with the least effort, creating a lifestyle that maximizes contentment while minimizing stress and physical demands. The schedule allows adequate time for each activity to be performed at a comfortable pace without rushing or pressure to move quickly to the next task. You develop preferences that would have seemed impossibly luxurious in your younger years, when survival requirements left little room for choices based on aesthetic or comfort considerations rather than practical necessity. Certain trees provide not just adequate nutrition but leaves with the exact texture and flavor that you've come to appreciate through decades of comparative evaluation of different browse options. The preferred leaves offer optimal combinations of nutritional density, palatability, and digestive compatibility that make eating a pleasure rather than simply a biological necessity. The trees that produce these optimal leaves become destinations for feeding expeditions rather than convenient stops during travels undertaken for other purposes. Particular patches of ground offer optimal comfort for afternoon rest periods, their surface characteristics and microclimate conditions providing relief from heat and support for aging joints that require more careful attention to comfort factors than was necessary during more resilient periods of life. The rest areas become valued locations that justify travel distances and scheduling adjustments that would have seemed unreasonable when comfort was a secondary consideration to survival requirements. Specific viewing positions provide the ideal combination of sun exposure and entertainment value, locations that offer visual access to ongoing wildlife activities, while providing optimal conditions for temperature, regulation, and relaxation. These observation posts become regular destinations that provide daily entertainment and environmental monitoring opportunities while requiring minimal physical effort or resource expenditure. The luxury of choosing activities and locations based on personal preference rather than survival necessity represents one of the unexpected benefits of reaching advanced age with adequate resources and established territorial security. The freedom to prioritize comfort and satisfaction creates opportunities for experiences that were previously unavailable due to more pressing concerns. From your elevated perspective, you watch the ongoing cycles of the savanna with the detached interest of someone who's seen all the variations and understands the patterns that underlie apparent novelty and change. New giraffes arrive and struggle with the same challenges you once faced. Their difficulties and successes following patterns that have remained essentially unchanged, despite the passage of decades and changes in individual participants. The struggles of new arrivals provide entertainment and educational opportunities while illustrating the continuity of challenges that characterize giraffe life, regardless of generational changes or environmental variations. The specific details vary, but the fundamental problems of learning to coordinate extremely tall bodies, establishing territorial arrangements, and developing efficient resource utilization strategies remain constant across generations. Territorial disputes play out according to patterns you've witnessed countless times. The conflicts following predictable sequences of escalation and resolution that depend more on the personality characteristics and resource requirements of the participants than on innovative strategies or novel approaches to familiar problems. The outcomes become predictable based on your understanding of the factors that determine success in territorial negotiations. The seasonal migrations follow routes that have remained essentially unchanged since you first learned them, the pathways representing optimized solutions to transportation problems that have persisted longer than any individual giraffe's lifetime. The routes demonstrate the wisdom embedded in community traditions and the value of preserving knowledge that has been tested through multiple generations of successful application. The continuity of migration patterns illustrates the stability of underlying ecological relationships and resource distributions that support giraffe communities across extended time periods. The persistence of these patterns provides reassurance about the long-term viability of survival strategies and community arrangements that have proven successful over historical periods. The younger giraffes still occasionally seek your advice, though more out of respect than necessity, their questions reflecting courtesy and acknowledgement of your status rather than urgent need for information that's unavailable from other sources. Your responses have evolved from detailed instructions to gentle suggestions to the kind of philosophical observations that are either profound or completely useless, depending on the recipient's frame of mind. The evolution of your advisory role reflects both your own changing perspective and the reduced practical applicability of your detailed technical knowledge to conditions that have changed since you acquired your expertise. The philosophical observations that characterize your current advisory style provide value through perspective and context rather than specific procedural guidance. The questions that younger giraffes bring to you often concern broader issues of meaning and purpose rather than technical problems with obvious solutions. They seek understanding of long-term patterns and lifetime strategies rather than immediate tactical advice, reflecting their recognition that your primary value lies in temporal perspective rather than current technical expertise. Your responses focus on the themes and patterns that have emerged from your lifetime of experience rather than specific recommendations for particular situations. The philosophical approach allows you to share insights that have general applicability without claiming current expertise in rapidly changing conditions that may require different approaches from those that were successful during your prime years. The reception of your philosophical observations varies significantly depending on the individual characteristics and current circumstances of the giraffes who seek your advice. Some find genuine value in the perspective and context you provide, while others clearly consider your responses irrelevant to their immediate concerns and practical problems. Your story concludes not with dramatic flourish, but with the quiet satisfaction of a life lived competently. The achievements measured not in spectacular successes or heroic actions, but in the sustained competence and community contribution that characterize successful long-term survival in a challenging environment. You've survived the challenges that eliminated others, contributed to the community's collective knowledge, and reached the age where your presence is valued more for its continuity than its productivity. The satisfaction derives from recognition that you've successfully navigated the complex challenge of being a very tall animal in a world designed for more reasonably sized creatures, solving problems that seemed impossible during your youth, and developing expertise that has served both your own survival needs and the welfare of your community throughout your adult life. The survival achievement represents success in a competition where many participants fail to reach maturity, and fewer still achieve your current advanced age with adequate health and resources for comfortable final years. The longevity itself demonstrates the effectiveness of the strategies and techniques you've developed, and the wisdom of the decisions you've made throughout your lifetime. Your contribution to community knowledge represents a legacy that extends beyond your individual survival to encompass improvements in collective capabilities that will benefit future generations long after your direct participation in community activities has ended. The teaching, route development, resource discovery, and knowledge transfer activities you've conducted create permanent additions to community assets. The transition from productivity-based value to continuity-based value reflects changes in your role within the community and recognition of the importance of institutional memory and historical perspective in maintaining the Socking 40s, community stability and wisdom. Your presence provides reassurance and context that contribute to community welfare through mechanisms that extend beyond immediate practical assistance. On a morning distinguished from thousands of others only by the particular quality of light filtering through the acacia leaves, you settle into your favorite resting spot with the contentment of someone who has successfully navigated the complex challenge of being a very tall animal in a world designed for more reasonably sized creatures. The morning light creates patterns of illumination that highlight the familiar textures and colors of your territory while providing warmth that eases the joint stiffness that has become a regular feature of your daily experience. The resting spot itself represents the culmination of decades of experience in identifying optimal locations for comfort and security, the position providing ideal conditions for temperature regulation, threat detection, and environmental observation, while requiring minimal energy expenditure to reach and maintain. The location serves as headquarters for your daily activities and observation point for monitoring community developments. The contentment you experience represents a form of satisfaction that wasn't available during more demanding periods of your life, when immediate concerns dominated attention and prevented the kind of reflective appreciation that characterizes your current existence. The contentment derives from recognition of achievements and appreciation of current circumstances rather than anticipation of future goals or anxiety about unresolved problems. The characterization of your life as the successful navigation of complex challenges captures the essential nature of giraffe existence and the remarkable achievement represented by long-term survival in an environment that presents constant obstacles and threats. The complexity of the challenges reflects both the physical difficulties imposed by extreme height and the social and environmental factors that affect all savanna creatures. The savanna continues its ancient routines around you, the familiar patterns of seasonal change and daily activity cycles providing backdrop for your observations and context for your reflections. Somewhere nearby, a young giraffe is learning to walk, the cycle of birth, growth, learning, and survival beginning again with new participants, who will face the same fundamental challenges while developing their own individual approaches to problems that have persisted across countless generations. In a world captivated by drama and dazzled by spectacle, the quiet persistence of the ordinary often slips beneath notice. Yet in the rhythms of uneventful days and undisturbed routines lies a form of resilience that is both ancient and profound. The life that appears boring at first glance is, on closer inspection, a masterpiece of adaptation and a monument to long-term success. The continuity of life's patterns, daily migrations for food and water, the rituals of grooming and resting, the alert scanning of the horizon for subtle shifts in wind and shadow provides a kind of comfort that transcends generations. These patterns are not just habits, They are the hard-won outcomes of evolutionary wisdom, etched into memory and muscle over millennia. Each repetition is a signal that the systems supporting survival remain intact, that the infrastructure of coexistence between organism and environment is still functioning. For the giraffe, whose life unfolds quietly on the African savanna, success is not measured in triumphs over enemies or in feats of physical domination, but in the steady, skillful navigation of a landscape that is both beautiful and unforgiving. Here, in this wide, sun-drenched expanse, every choice matters, each movement calculated, each adaptation honed by necessity. A giraffe survives not by conquest, but by reading the terrain with sensitivity, responding to the subtlest changes in vegetation, weather, and predator behavior. Such lives of subtle competence, accumulate victories too small to be celebrated in headlines. A mouthful of leaves, chosen wisely, a watering hole approached at just the right moment, a calf successfully nudged to safety. These moments add up, season by season, to the ultimate prize, endurance. And in endurance, there is quiet triumph, a triumph not of power, but of balance. This balance is more than instinct, it is learned. It reflects a continuous cycle of observation, interpretation, and decision-making. Over years and decades, the giraffe develops a repertoire of responses, behavioral blueprints passed on through action rather than speech. Where to go when the rains delay, how to approach a new herd, when to stand still, and when to bolt. Each decision, small in itself, is part of a larger pattern of survival, a mosaic of micro-choices that form the foundation of stability. To label this existence boring is to miss its depth. It is only boring to those who define meaning by novelty or spectacle. But from the perspective of natural systems, a life that repeats successful behaviors year after year is not dull, it is masterful. To sustain life in a world that constantly shifts beneath your feet is no small thing. It is a kind of quiet genius. Indeed, the most remarkable aspect of these so-called boring lives is their refusal to collapse. Entropy waits at every turn, in the threat of drought, the teeth of a lion, the emergence of illness. And yet, life continues. Cycles of rest and vigilance, feeding and moving, birthing and rearing, all persist. It is this persistence that makes the ordinary extraordinary. It reveals that survival is not an accident, but an art. There is hope in this rhythm. The dependable return of the rains, the re-emergence of green from dry earth, the sound of hooves over cracked soil, heading toward familiar watering holes. These recurring patterns offer more than reassurance. They offer evidence that life can sustain itself through uncertainty. The fact that generations of giraffes have followed similar paths, solving similar problems with similarly effective solutions, suggests a resilience far greater than any single moment of dramatic survival could represent. What emerges is a quiet confidence in the future, not the naive certainty that nothing will go wrong, but the grounded understanding that the community knows how to respond when it does. Elders model behavior. Young ones watch and learn. And the systems, both biological and social, that have been developed through experience are passed on not through language, but through living. That passing on is not just about individual knowledge, but about shared infrastructure routes remembered, safe places known, rhythms of the land understood. In this way, the success of one generation becomes the inheritance of the next. What was once a hard-won adaptation becomes a natural part of the daily routine, integrated so seamlessly that its brilliance may go unnoticed. And yet, nothing about this is easy. A life that looks calm from a distance is, up close, a constant dance of attentiveness. The giraffe may appear relaxed while grazing, but its ears are tuned to distant rustles, its nostrils sampling the breeze for signs of threat. Its movement may be slow, but it is never careless. This sustained state of awareness, practiced over decades, is a form of wisdom. And wisdom, in any species, is never boring. To live long is to survive countless risks and to adapt again and again to shifting conditions. It is to recognize when a familiar path is no longer safe, when a once reliable pattern begins to falter. It is to change course, gently but decisively. And when these decisions ripple across a community, when others follow your lead, when young ones mimic your caution, you become not just a survivor, but a contributor to the collective good. This, then, is the essence of the boring life's remarkableness, its cumulative impact, like rain carving stone, like roots breaking rock, like wind shaping dunes. It is a force made powerful by time and consistency. It teaches that you do not need to dominate your world in order to change it. You only need to know how to live within it and live well. The giraffe's peaceful evening at the end of its long life is not simply a moment of rest. It is a conclusion rich with meaning. It is the gentle closing of a long, skillful performance. It is the last page in a volume of survival, competence, and wisdom. There is no applause, no monument, but there is the deep satisfaction of a task well completed. Even in death, the life echoes forward. Though your breath slows and your eyes grow dim, something within you does not end, it is simply passed on. Others will walk the same paths, eat from the same trees, and bed down in the same safe hollows beneath the starlit sky. They will draw from the same wells of inherited wisdom, shaped not only by your words or movements, but by your very presence, by how you lived, how you listened to the rhythms of the land, and how you made space for others to survive. They will benefit from the choices you made, the dangers you avoided, and the quiet patterns you established through countless sunrises and sunsets. They may not know your name, but they will feel your legacy woven into the choices they make and the instincts they trust. A new generation of giraffes will carry your story in the way they pause to listen to wind, the way they navigate the sparse waterholes during drought, the way they move in silence, attuned to shadows and changes in scent. The continuity of the community becomes the legacy of the individual, and so your story, as a singular being, draws to a close. Yet the story does not stop. It flows onward, as all stories of real meaning do not in grand monuments or echoed triumphs, but in the living momentum of the community you helped preserve. This is the paradox of lasting meaning. It is not found in the blaze of brief brilliance, but in the duration and depth of sustained presence. A flash may illuminate a moment, but endurance shapes the terrain. To last, to adapt, to persist, that is no small feat. It is a quiet act of defiance against entropy, against randomness, against collapse. Your life becomes part of a pattern, a small but essential note in the symphony of existence that has played across the savannah for thousands of years. And in that pattern, there is beauty, there is dignity. There is the sacred. When viewed through this wider lens, even the seemingly mundane reveals mythic proportions. The giraffe who wakes early each morning, who moves with careful intention, who grazes without waste, who teaches not through drama but through steady example, this creature is not a portrait of boredom, but of majesty. A majesty without fanfare, without audience. A nobility that exists simply because it is true. This is not the majesty of spectacle, it is the majesty of wisdom. The wisdom that knows what is enough. The wisdom that understands when to move and when to stay. The wisdom that teaches survival, not as conquest, but as coexistence. Not because this giraffe has changed the world in a dramatic or revolutionary fashion, but because it has honored the world by learning how to live in it well and by helping others do the same. And now the world continues. The sun rises again. The dry grasses sway in the wind. A new calf is born, blinking at the brightness of its first day. Around it, the savannah hums not with noise, but with potential. The air carries whispers, whispers of all that has come before. The low, barely audible presence of countless quiet lives. Lives that succeeded not by shouting, but by enduring. The wisdom of these quiet lives surrounds the young giraffe like a field of invisible guardians. Though unseen, their influence is everywhere. In the instincts that guide its legs, in the caution that shapes its steps, in the comfort of safety learned from generations of those who paid attention. The past leans gently into the future, not with weight, but with encouragement. And so, the so-called boring life stands revealed not as a failure of imagination or ambition, but as a triumph of form over chaos. It is the steady pulse of life, doing what life must do. Continue, evolve, adapt, preserve. It is the victory of learning over randomness, of discipline over distraction, of stewardship over spectacle. This kind of life resists glamorization, and that is precisely what makes it sacred. It does not demand attention. It simply works. Quietly, efficiently, compassionately. It is a life that says, the world is difficult, and I endured it well not only for myself, but for others. The rhythm of such a life is not the drumbeat of conquest, but the heartbeat of care. And when the world sleeps, it does not dream of glory. It dreams of safety, of cool shadows in blistering heat, of rain that arrives before it's too late, of predators kept at bay by wisdom passed down, of calves surviving their first year, of dry seasons endured and green ones awaited with patience. These are the dreams that matter, not because they are dramatic, but because they make the continuation of all things possible. They are dreams built on the foundations of boring brilliance, the brilliance of lives that did what needed to be done again and again, until the doing became second nature, and survival became almost a kind of art. A candle flickers in the quiet. It does not blaze, it does not explode. It simply burns slowly, steadily, without complaint. It is the light of endurance, of resilience, of long lives, lived wisely. This light illuminates not just the life of one, but the possibility of many. It shows a path not of shortcuts and leaps, but of footsteps placed carefully and patiently over time. In its glow, the boring life reveals its truest self, not boring at all, but beautiful beyond words. For in the end, what greater legacy could there be than a world still working, a herd still thriving, a system of life still intact, because enough beings chose the slow, quiet path of wisdom rather than the fast, loud path of destruction? And somewhere out there, just beyond the horizon, another young giraffe stands tall for the first time, stretching its neck toward the Sunday. It does not know your name, but it walks a little safer because you once walked here, too. Your presence, your patience, your quiet triumphs, these are not forgotten. They are translated into instinct, into culture, into the seamless continuation of life in a world too fragile to rely on brilliance alone. The candle flickers. It does not go out. It passes its flame, and the story continues.